So if you have children, you have the vocation of mother. It's not really even a question. God gave you children, so he's called you to be a mother. God joined you together with your husband, so he's called you to be a wife. The Bible says that women are to keep the home. So God has called you to be a homemaker. And God usually doesn't send vocations singularly. He likes to load us up with them. And so we want to identify the different roles and responsibilities that he is calling us to serve in. And then as we think about that, we also want to be aware if there are roles and responsibilities that we are trying to fit ourselves into or trying to reach for that we aren't actually being called to. Or maybe there are vocations that we are being called to and we're plugging our ears and singing, la, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the calling. If I don't hear the calling, then I don't have to do that extra work, right? So vocation is all about calling. It's not about personal choice most of the time. Now, the best scenario is where your personal choice lines up with God's calling. And that is the essence of learning to love what must be done, because God's calling on our life is going to be so much better than any that we, oh, I thought I could make it through. God's calling on our life. All right, no, I thought I'd start back at the beginning, but I lost the beginning. We want God's calling on our life to line up with our choice and our desires and what we're eagerly working towards. And that is the essence of learning to love what must be done, because God's call on our life is going to be a better life than one that we dream up or choose for ourselves. So, as we start talking about vocations and brain dumping and categorizing and, doing the nitty-gritty work here, we want to be observant of actuality and reality more than we are in our heads dreaming and imagining what we think life is supposed to be like or should be like, or what we would love to remake our life after. We need to start with what is right now. So look at the different roles and responsibilities. Being paid for the work or not paid is irrelevant. The question is, who are you being called to function as? And when we begin brain dumping our vocations, our different roles and responsibilities, it's not going to come out the first time as the full plan, as it's not going to come out as the perfect, ideal, correct lineup. It's a messy process to figure this out. So don't be afraid of the mess and don't wait to write anything down till you're sure that you're right. Writing down the different roles and responsibilities that you have is not a lifelong commitment. So you don't have to be afraid of writing it down. You're writing it down to help your thinking process and to help you observe what's really going on and then to see all those pieces together lined out. So the first step of thinking about your vocations is to look at the different roles and responsibilities that you have right now. And they aren't all going to be completely different vocations when we get to the end. So you might brainstorm a dozen or 2 dozen roles and responsibilities, and you're not going to try to be juggling that many different vocations. There's a process for combining and filtering and merging and putting it together. But at first, before you can get to that stage, you really do need to brainstorm as much as possible so that your thinking has time to ruminate and expand on what's going on. And so, yes, being paid for the work or not is irrelevant. It's, have you been given a part to play in a particular setting or to particular people? and not theoretically, but actually. So this isn't like, well, I have the vocation of evangelist because we're all supposed to be sharing the gospel. Well, you can share the gospel as a mother, and that would be a part of your mother vocation. So if you really want to write that down, really want to write down evangelist, you can. And we're probably going to then put that underneath your other roles and responsibilities. When you're thinking about roles and responsibilities, think about those things that take up actual time in your week, that require your attention and energy and time in your real life. So I'll give an example for years, coming up on 2 decades, actually, or at least we're past 2 decades now on me teaching classes to other kids. I taught homeschool co-op classes before actually I even had kids and before my kids were school age. And then when my kids became school age, I started doing at least once a week something with friends with my kids. And so that is a stretch of time. And there have been all kinds of different arrangements that I've done over those 2 decades. Sometimes I was paid and sometimes not. And sometimes, the compensation packages, if you will, have looked different. But I have taught kids for over 20 years. Some of the kids have been my own kids, and some of the kids have been other kids. Sometimes I'm paid for teaching other people's kids, and sometimes I'm not. That's whether or not I'm being paid for the work doesn't matter because I'm both a homeschooler, a homeschool mom, educating my own children, and teaching other kids. I have educator as a vocation. So there are a few different ways that I teach, but functionally, I'm being called to educate people right now. And so as you are brainstorming those different roles and responsibilities you're given, you can go ahead and list those out as separately. So it's like, okay, we've got homeschooling, we've got co-op teacher, co-op leader. We can put those as distinct things for now to brainstorm, but eventually they might find their way into a merged single vocation. And as you're brainstorming, look at what's actually on your calendar. Look at the things that actually make it on your to-do list, that people call you up for, that have real place in your life. And don't spend a bunch of time thinking about what your particular strengths are that should be utilized or what your ideal life would look like. The vocations that we will be identifying are not forever. They aren't lifelong commitments. Over the years, I have read so many productivity books, self-help books, planning books, business books, dozens and dozens of books in that kind of genre. And they all have a different spin on this same idea of, identifying your one thing or your core competencies. Write a mission statement. There are different words that are used or terms used for this kind of exercise. And on the one hand, this process of finding, naming, and using your vocations is in that genre. It fulfills the need that those writers are correctly identifying, that we see meaning and purpose in our life, that we have something beyond just checking things off on our day that's helping us even put things on our to-do list in the first place, much less work on them. But the difference, I hope, my intended difference between what we are doing here today with vocations and what most of the secular self-help world has you do with this kind of mission type exercise or zone of genius. Like, figure out who you are at core, at heart. Figure out your one thing. And I was like, well, if I have to go back down all the way to one thing, then I'm a Christian. But those in the secular world don't have an actual base or foundation to go back to. And these exercises become exercises of self-creation, figuring out and creating from nothing your identity and your calling, and finding a calling from within yourself and then trying to make that happen. And that's the wrong basis. That's not a good plan. And you ought not come up with your own identity or calling or meaning or purpose, starting with the revealed word of God and what you already know about your God and your family and your work is the foundation for meaningful progress and for working in a really grounded, encouraged way in the midst of work that most of those self-help books would have outside of your calling or core competencies or zone of genius or whatever. Most of those kind of approaches would say, oh, well, housework is just menial. That's just something that has to happen because it has to happen because the world's obnoxious. And so, but figure out, what value you're adding to the world and try to maximize that, maximize the thing that you personally care about the most and minimize as much of the mundane, tedious things outside your zone of genius. Like, who identifies dishes for laundry as their zone of genius, even if you're doing that as a job? That's not the kind of answer that those mission type books are looking for. And in fact, most of them do, even the ones for women's time management in particular, will have you find all the ways to minimize the amount of housework that you do so that you have more time to do the things that matter. And we want to start with what we know about God and salvation and the way that God has made the world and the way he's called us to function in it, so that we don't get discouraged and pulled away from our actual mission because of the spin of secular society. And I'm not saying that dishes and laundry are your mission, but they are very important tools of your real mission. Because if you have a husband and children, you have people who need to eat and be clothed. And it is not incidental. If someone makes dinner, cleans up after it, does the laundry, like, those are not optional things. That is not low class, meaningless work. It is bodily work. It is laborious work. It is repetitive work. And it is work for a very particular mission and purpose that matters. And so when we have our vocations lined up and we recognize that God has given us a place and a job in this world to build his kingdom and to bring him honor and glory, then we have a firm basis for learning to love what must be done, for seeing the meaning behind the work that the world tells us doesn't matter, that anyone could do. And if you can at all afford it, you should pay someone else to do it. They'll have more meaning from it if they're getting a paycheck for it. But since you aren't getting a paycheck for it, you should definitely not be doing it. You should be somehow making others do it instead of you, because you have value. Well, I have value, and I'm bestowing and building up value in the world by all the people that I'm building up, by feeding them and clothing them and making our house function as a hospitable beacon in the world. Our light is set up on the hill. And it's my job to keep that light burning. That's not insignificant work. It is work that has a lot of small pieces and parts that make it up. But we can tether those seemingly random and mundane tasks to our purpose and calling. And we will have a basis for finding real encouragement, not just encouragement like, oh, someone's going to pat me on the back or pat me on the head and make me feel better about myself, but encouragement, like having the courage to do the work because it's actually getting you somewhere. It really is meaningful and purposeful. And that will protect us from the temptations to discouragement and frustration that are often so tempting. When we can ground ourselves in vocation, we will find ourselves stronger to do the work in front of us well and cheerfully. It's not just a grin and bear it, and eventually you'll get used to it. It's like actually loving the joy that's set before you. It's loving the place that you've been put. Like in the Psalms where it says, the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. That's what we want to be able to say about our life.